Welcome to today's Yogi and the Blonde. My name is Nadia, aka the Yogi, and this is
Michelle, aka The Blonde.
Whenever I do that and I point towards you in the video, it doesn't always end up that way.
I was going to say, I feel like I've seen video clips of one of us on top of the other. So pointing to your left doesn't
those
work.
video clips are actually when we're editing to those little micro bits and stuff to put on social media.
Yeah. Snippets. Yeah, they're very cute. I quite like them. Technology is so clever.
Now, today, before we go into tangent and we get a little bit distracted, now today we're going to be coming back to our gut health 101, but now we're going to talk more about the signs of an unhealthy gut and what it's going to be. This is our 33rd episode, and this is going to be linked to our 32nd episode. So check out that one first before you check this one out, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Michelle?
It does make sense. If you're listening to this as your first ever episode of the Yogi and the Blonde, go back one and listen to that one because
the
32nd episode, because we're talking gut health. And in our last episode, we talked about the gut and what it does. So it's quite a nice intro into what we're talking about today. We're just building up onto that because we talked about ways to promote a healthy gut. So today we're talking about, well, how do you know if your gut is unhealthy?
We might think it's normal. Like a lot of people like, oh, I've got a headache. But actually, that's a sign of your body telling you something's out of balance. Your body is really intelligent, but it's like we've got to be a detective and try to figure out what that means. Because if Michelle has a headache, that's going to be a different reason to my headache. Because our bodies, even though they're the same, they're very different. And our physiology and psychology is going to be different as well. So it's going to affect us. And maybe I might have some mutated genes and she doesn't. And so that means my body's working differently than her body. So that's my thing lately. I've been saying a lot this, Michelle, is we cannot compare or judge each other because of the fact, especially not judge, but compare each other, because I'm an apple, she's an orange, she's a pea, I'm a carrot, I'm a zucchini, she's a cucumber. Like, we're so different, but we've got a lot of similarities. Like, we all have arms, legs, organs, brain, face, skin, all that kind of stuff. But when you break it down, we're very different as well. So how things work and how things break down will be very different. Sorry, a bit of a tangent there again.
That was such an interesting tangent.
With what we're talking about.
What is she going to say next? I'm a pea, I'm a carrot, I'm a cucumber. I was like, what's happening?
Well, it's related to food because food has different like nutrition qualities, textures, taste. So we are all different textures and tastes and qualities.
You are what you eat, allegedly. That was brilliant. Ooh. That was brilliant. Okay, so yes, very, very relevant because we're talking about foods. And in the last episode where we talk about the gut, we talked about how the gut is responsible for breaking down the foods that we eat, extracting nutrients, extracting minerals, vitamins, whatever, to help our bodies run well. Bringing us back in.
Just a summary. That was a good summary.
Just to summarize. So I will start just by talking about some of the, I guess, more expected signs of an unhealthy gut. And then Nadia's got some incredible stories to tell you from her own personal experience about some of the more interesting ones. So when we think about our gut and things going wrong with it, obviously there are some really, I guess, obvious symptoms. Things like constipation. Are you able to go to the toilet regularly or at all? And also the opposite of constipation. One of the signs that we know something is going wrong is when we can't stop going to the toilet and we have diarrhea and you know, I don't know if anyone is familiar with the Bristol stool chart, which basically is a chart of the firmness of your poops. And on one end of the scale, I think number 1 is like watery diarrhea, when your gut is just like, get out. And then the other end of the spectrum is where it's like solid, hard balls that are just so hard to pass and it's painful. And ideally you want your poo to be somewhere in the middle. And if
Kind of
it's
like a sausage.
a nice soft sausage, just pass my soft sausage. That's what we're going for. Nice log. And if it's either way, where we're more towards that diarrhea watery end, or it's at the hard to pass solid end, both of those areas are kind of signs that something is not right in your gut. So those are some really obvious things to be looking out for, because those are things that we're hopefully doing quite regularly. Other things to look out for that might suggest that something's up: bloating, especially after you've eaten something, that feeling where you've just got so much solid gas in your tummy. And also maybe that gas is coming out. Excessive gas is a sign of an unhealthy gut. And I specifically said excessive because farting, can I say farting?
Yeah, why can't you say
whatever? Well, I don't know. I feel like there should be a better, more professional word. What's a professional word?
Let's gas. Releasing of gas.
Passing gas is very normal, but excessively, where it's like a lot, but also very smelly. Like, you can expect some gas to smell a bit because of, it's come from your insides. It's because of things breaking down and fermenting, there's going to be a smell, but when you've done a really bad one or someone around you has done a really bad one.
Silent but violent.
Violent. Like, there's a sign that something's not right. Shouldn't be that bad. And if you're passing really bad ones, it's like, oh, what's going on here? That's something to be aware of. So I would say that those are the really obvious ones, things that are to do with your poop and your actual distended tummy full of gas. Some of the less usual ones, and we're going to talk a bit more about this now, but things like fatigue, sluggishness, low energy. Heartburn is a good kind of immediate one that you might notice again after food. Skin conditions can be related to something going on in your gut. Sleep issues can be related to something going on in your gut. And actually, before we hit record, we were just talking about how things going wrong in your gut can affect your mood as well. So those are some of the things that you might not necessarily relate back to your gut, but all of those things can also be signs of an unhealthy gut.
Yeah. It's quite I've had this year, I think I got tested positive for a thing called Shinga Toxin. And it's quite interesting because through the transition of moving from Auckland to Maria Hot Springs, I was working on myself. I had still, working on the grieving, changes, and moving is one of the stressful things in life, which can affect your gut health as well. So anyways, I've been feeling very unwell, low energy, like flat. I mean, I get exhausted and I just felt like crashing lots. Affected my moods. I was very emotional. I am an emotional person, but it was different. Just different. But coming across and getting Shinga Toxin, which Shinga is part of the E. coli family. And what happened is I was feeling nauseous at times where I felt sick to my stomach. I felt like I was going to get where I felt nauseous, I felt like I was going to get sick, but I never did. And where I'd get gut pains. That's another thing with one of the signs of an unhealthy gut is where you get constant pain. And this was happening for a good over a month. And then eventually I got massive diarrhea, like talking about water base. And I never realized how this affected. Even after I had the diarrhea, my energy was horrible and flat. It affected my moods. This is something we were talking with, I was talking, Michelle and I, what Michelle was talking about with the moods thing, because I noticed it really affected my moods as well. And it's something, the more that I'm doing more research with us talking about gut health, and more I get, like the little light comes on and going, that makes sense. That's why I was like that when I was going through the whole Shinga toxin. And since then, without even just not linking it all together, but I started changing a lot of things in my diet. And I was saying to Michelle as well that the food I eat really affect me massively, affect my performance, not just physical performance, but mental, my sleep, my moods, and the way that I think. Like if I eat a lot of processed foods, a lot of anything that's gluten or it's been contaminated, or dairy, I've like omitted now dairy. The only thing I eat out of dairy would be ghee, but that's clarified butter, so that's a little bit different because it's been processed, and that's an Ayurvedic thing, and I don't want to get into that at the moment, but yeah. So
That's a
but what I've
topic for
noticed is,
another day.
yeah, another day, a topic about another day, about the difference of that. But just by adding, I've making sure that I'm getting my good vegetables. I am eating whole foods, my hydration, not consuming a lot of sugar and processed foods, but still having my fruits, still having some natural sugars because our body still needs that, and as well as adding glutamine. And I've done Be Pure make a probiotic powder with fiber, which I put that in my cacao, and I have cacao. Cacao is really good for the brain and mental health as well. So I have that, and I've noticed a shift, and I noticed that I do all that. I also do a green mix, and I've noticed that's helped as well. But it's quite fascinating to see all that connection with that. When it comes to like your leaky gut, the IBS, that whole thing is, it increases intestinal permeability. So, and it occurs in the
Permeability.
lining of, pardon, Michelle?
Permeability.
Permeability, thank you, permeability. And it occurs in the lining of the lining of the intestine becomes damaged, and then this is where it allows the undigested food particles and toxins to enter the bloodstream. The way I look at it is, let's say I make a fist with my hands and I connect them, and see how I connect my knuckles here, connecting for those that are watching. Now, when we start to create a gap, that's what it's saying. The gap is when there's that gap because of the inflammation in the leaky gut, there's a gap. So that means the food particles, the toxins get into there and get into the bloodstream. And then that's where that inflammation comes into play, where your food sensitivities come into play, a host of other issues. And so that's when you get abdominal pain, you get that bloating, that the altered bowel habits. So with this now, this is where you would, for the healing, you would be changing the way that you eat. Now, let me go back again to a bit about the Shinga toxin. And what it does is, like, it's produced a certain bacteria, and it's from the E. coli family, and it's quite severe. And I didn't realize how severe it is and how damaging it is for the gut. And when it damages the gut, we've got to realize this is why it affects our brain. This is why it affects that fogginess, why it affects our fatigue and our energy crashes. And I was like completely crashing. And because there's that brain gut connection. Now, there's the vagus nerve that starts in our gut, in our abdomen, and it comes up into the bottom of the brain stem. And this is where how we manage our nervous system, because that's also connected to the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous system. So that's why breathing is really important as well, because it helps manage that. Our gut creates serotonin. So when we think about how much it is, and when you hear people talk about that whole gut brain connection, there's more and more studies, and how the food and how we manage everything is really, really important with that. With this growing as well, and coming into perimenopause has really made me think about my gut health even more so, because believe it or not, I'm getting that foggy brain. We were talking, I think it was the other week, and you're like, oh, Nadia, maybe that's perimenopause because of that as well. Now, I don't want to always blame everything on perimenopause and use that as a crutch, but we need to change the way we eat, because that also affects your guts, because your hormones are changing. And a lot of hormones are made in our gut as well, and they travel through that way. So, and if this inflammation is affecting us, that means that's going to affect our blood flow. And the hormones use our blood flow as a highway system to travel around through our body. So if you think about it, if you've got that leaky gut happening and particles are getting into the blood flow, that means, and toxins are getting into the blood flow, that's going to affect your hormones as well. And it just seems to be like, the more I learn and the more it seems to grow, it's just like, wow, that makes so much sense. Yeah, this is, and with the Shinga Toxin has been such a horrible experience. Let me tell you, not the greatest, even to a point with the Shinga Toxin. I'm going to go a bit disgusting here, guys, that around my anus and my butt cheeks, I had bacteria growing there. So I had to get an antifungal, which there's I don't know how to pronounce it in the Māori terms, but there's a pepper tree that is native to New Zealand. It's called Hopatipa, something like that. And there's a company in Nelson, in the South Island, where they make a cream, and it helps with that. And this cream helps with removing, because it's antifungal. So you can use it to like spicing, because if you take a few bites on the leaf, it actually is really, give it a bit, you'll feel like that peppery fire taste, but it's also really good for antifungal. So yeah, so I used that, and that was amazing. So it's really, we don't realize how it can affect everything like that, because I didn't think about bacteria growing on my skin around my butt, and that's from the toxins, the Shinga toxin, and from the diarrhea and all of that. I know it sounds disgusting, but hey, this is reality, and it happens. And it's a very important conversation and topic to talk about, and to know that this happens. And if this is happening continuously, we're losing our nutrients as well. So we're not absorbing our nutrients in there. Yeah. I think I've done enough there. I feel like I can keep going. But yeah.
I've shared enough about my bowel issues.
I've shared
You're
enough
coming
about
out the other side.
about my bowels, and just such a beautiful experience.
It was a learning experience, at least.
It has been.
Yeah.
Totally has been. And like I think I've said to you more than once as well, is that anything that happens to us, the worst case scenarios that happens, is a good thing, because we learn from it, right? And we learn from that, which is a good thing, because then we grow, we evolve. And this is what I found. I've evolved. I've grown. I've evolved from it, and I'm learning, and I'm changing things, and I'm becoming aware with it as I change, as I'm adding something, I'm noticing a difference, because when I take it out, it's like doing an elimination diet. When I take it out and I'm not eating that or consuming certain supplements for a few days, I notice a total difference. So I gotta, make sure I keep doing this stuff that's gonna nurture me and help me heal and keep my gut nice and healthy as my body changes and my hormones change.
Yeah. And I think that's something that's good to know. I feel like it's very easy for us to get set in our ways and just kind of eat in a certain way and live in a certain way. And I guess you don't really expect that way isn't necessarily going to serve you for the rest of your life, especially if you are a woman. And it's really interesting because especially in New Zealand, especially in England, there's a real culture of drinking alcohol. And
Yes.
it's very normal to have wine with your dinner during the week. Like, it's super normal. And I think something that doesn't happen to all women, but something that does happen to women as they start to go through perimenopause and menopause, the way that we metabolize alcohol is different. I'm not at perimenopause yet, but I've noticed that as I've got older, and perhaps as I now naturally drink less because of my lifestyle, I definitely metabolize alcohol in a different way. And
Yeah.
I guess because I'm older and wiser now, I guess I've just actively made the choice to not drink as much alcohol. Like, I used to be a drinker. I drank so much. I would drink a whole bottle of red wine most nights. Like, this is 10 years ago. This isn't that long ago.
Yeah.
I would probably die if I did that now, and I would feel shit. Like, I have 2 glasses of wine and I can feel it the next day. So, you do, I think, naturally start to become, or hopefully you should start to become more body aware. You are super body aware, and I'm quite body aware. And I think that's because of the industry that we're in, and because this stuff interests us and we're keen to experiment and try different things. I would say most people, when they start working with us or that don't work with us, might not necessarily be aware. And they might just be like, oh, I just feel really low energy. And, they might blame it on there's a bug going around. They might not actually think maybe it's what I'm putting into me. And maybe I'm just not reacting to it in the same way. And, it's really common for people to cut down on alcohol. It's common for people to cut down on coffee. Yeah. And I've always said, I hope that never happens to me because I love coffee. And I just think that's such a good example because it's like coffee has become habitual for me. But what if one day actually I realize this isn't serving me anymore?
Yeah. Yeah.
Do I just keep going because that's what I do? Or do I say, okay, well, maybe I need to stop doing this and try something else? And change is hard. And especially when it's stuff that you attach emotion and socializing to as well.
That's
so
also
like
increasing, the more that I read about it, that's also because of your dopamine, because it increases your dopamine, right? And that's that addictive feel good hormone. And the dopamine gets raised when we eat, like, for me, I've got a sweet tooth for like the chocolate, my dopamine raises. Or, this is where sometimes the dopamine is just allows to becomes dominant. Does that make sense? Just like how we've spoken about ego. Ego's important, but we don't want ego to be the driver and the dominant side. But then it's the same thing with dopamine. Dopamine's a good thing. The dopamine lifts up our energy and our mood, and we feel so good. But that's an addictive bed. So that's where that would come into play as well. Now I'm going to go back a little bit because you're talking about alcohol. I was having a conversation with my mom today. And she is one of her sisters, younger sisters, is going completely like dementia. And she's noticed that her husband will cook like basic foods, nothing extravagant. But one of my mom's sisters, there's 2 of them, one of them, anyways, there's a bunch of them, a few of them there. One of them is like cooking meals and stuff like that, and cooking whole cooked meals, right? My mom noticed a change in mood in my aunt, but then also noticed a change because my mom was talking about, she's like, oh, she doesn't drink normally as what she normally does, but I noticed she drank more alcohol than normal. And she's like, her moods became, because it's quite difficult, to a point where she can't recognize herself in a mirror.
Oh, God.
Yeah, like every morning she sees herself and she goes through a bit of a spat and a fight and all this stuff because she doesn't recognize herself. So, and this alcohol, and it's like, I want to go, Mom, she shouldn't be drinking. Mom, she needs to have a different type of diet. Mom, she needs to have a good, healthy gut health diet because that's connected to the brain and all that. And I'm just like, but I know that there's nothing she can do about it. It would have to be my aunt's husband, right? So it just really makes me think of like having this conversation with my mom about that and recognizing that and going, well, it makes sense. If she's having like very starchy, basic, very Western kind of meals, of course she's not going to be in better moods. And they even show that with autism, on the perspective on that as well, the food, the gut can affect. And I know like certain dyes and glutens and all this stuff where I've got a cousin who's his stepson is on the spectrum, and cheeks would go really red if he ate certain foods and stuff like that, and they notice his mood completely change. So if we look at that and how that is, and they notice with people with dementia, with Alzheimer's, they notice if the certain foods or they're not eating and creating movement is another thing that doesn't help to create that blood flow, to help the blood flow to the brain, to help the blood flow into the organs for the organs to function properly, then that makes sense. That makes complete and utter sense. So it's not just about food and exercise, but it's about what kind of food you're eating. But see, again, it comes down to that one person's food is another person's poison. So Michelle can eat gluten, but I can't. You know, Michelle eats dairy, but I know it affects me. So we just really need to, it's not one size that fits all. And it's quite an investigative thing. And it's just about taking one step at a time. Wow, that was another tangent, but that felt good.
No, but it's but it comes back to that awareness, doesn't it? It's like trying different things. Like you haven't been tested to show that you're lactose intolerant, but you experimented on yourself and you noticed there was a massive difference when you cut out dairy or cheese.
Dairy, like I don't do any, like I said, the only dairy product I do is ghee, but that's again broken down in the way that it's done. It doesn't affect you the same.
Less lactose.
Now the thing is though, why I've omitted dairy is another thing why I've completely gone through it, because I have a love of cheese. Love cheese. Let me just say that one more time. Love cheese. But
have you seen Wallace and Gromit? I don't know if it's an English thing. It's like a cartoon. It's called Wallace and Gromit. It's a guy called Wallace and his dog called Gromit.
Yeah.
And they love cheese. Just like you just said. Like, love cheese. I'll have to send you a video of Wallace and Gromit.
Okay, do so.
You'll be like,
do so. But what the connection is that when you are gluten intolerant, celiac, you need to have dairy-free as well, because the protein in the dairy, when we consume it, the body thinks it's gluten, so it'll react that way. And dairy can be quite inflammatory for a lot of people. I'm not saying for everybody, for a lot of people. And so that means that creating that inflammation, that means that's going to create inflammation into your gut and create issues, right? So that's one of the things why I've been it's taken me a long time, because I'm not celiac. My sister's celiac, and she is like really sensitive celiac. But what the studies show, and when you look at Dr. Libby with her studies, she's said that any sibling that is celiac, your siblings need to be at least eating gluten-free as well, because they might not show celiac, but there'll be gluten intolerance, and there's no test for gluten intolerance. And when I got tested, my doctor had said, well, because you're close to the marker of being close to celiac, and that you've got a sister that's celiac, then I would eat a gluten-free diet because of that. Otherwise, if I had no relatives that was celiac, then I would be able to eat gluten. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And then that affects, again, your gut health, and you're lying and you're absorbing that nutrition and everything like that. I think we've we've hit it all, haven't we, looking at our notes here?
Yeah. Certainly we're talking about unhealthy guts here.
Yeah. And then in another episode down the road, we will talk about some things that we can do, various things that you can trial and see what's going to work for you individually. Because again, one person's food is another person's poison. So just being mindful of that. you've got to play around with it. That's the only way.
But also just the awareness of how it links into everything, like you've touched on a few times. Like, it's not just, I eat plenty of veggies and fiber and get all of my macronutrients in. It's also, are you hydrated? Are you sleeping? Are you stressed? You know, everything works together. So having that awareness as well.
Yeah. It's not just doing one thing. It's not just like when somebody wants to lose weight, it's not just about exercise. It's exercise is important, of course, that's obvious, but it's also what foods are affecting you, how much you're consuming, are you hydrated, are you well hydrated, are you stressed, are you sleeping? So there's all these little things, and it feels quite overwhelming, and that's why when you get a coach, that's what helps you to start to break it down, and it's not an overnight fix. That's the other thing. It's not going to happen overnight. It might take a few years actually to get through that, because I know when I had many years ago, I did my big weight loss. I lost 20 kgs, and it took me a year and a half to lose that 20 kgs. And then I had kept it off for a very long time. Now I've gone through grief and perimenopause, and then COVID and the toxin. I put on the Shinga Toxin. I put on a bit of weight, probably about 10 kgs. But I'll lose it again. I'm not too stressed about it. It'll happen. So just a process, right? Life happens, so it's not always about being perfect.
Exactly.
Healthy gut is so important.
Yes. It makes the other stuff easier.
I'm going to suggest, if there's a book you want to read, the first book, what was the planting of my seed on this journey, was called a book called Eating Alive. And this is written by a naturopath in Canada. And this was actually my Kiwi mom is the one that had suggested for me to read it. And it talks about the gut. And that was my seed that was planted for me to get into the health and wellness industry. And it started off with yoga, and then now it's all sorts of things, just like Michelle. Anywho, I think that's us for today. Wouldn't you say so, Michelle? Or is there anything else you want to finish off with?
No, I'm good. Okay. Otherwise, I'll go onto another tangent.
We're good for tangents. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for listening and coming and joining us. Listening, watching, whatever is your floats your boat. Otherwise, remember to like, to follow, to comment. We would love to hear what you guys think and your thoughts and anything you guys want us to dive deep into. But thank you again for your support and coming along and listening. Have a fabulous day. Yogi and the Blonde, thank you very much. Ciao.
Peace.